But this morning we kick off a brand new sermon series over the next 3 weeks titled Messy. Messy, so it actually works really well that it is kind of a messy in here. This morning when we were getting all the last bits cleaned up, kind of thought about how we shouldn't have vacuumed up. We should have left it a little bit messy as just an environmental reality. Now, dirt on the floor is one thing. Dirt and mess and junk and pain in our lives is a whole other thing, especially when we talk about the mess of relating with difficult people. Now, I don't necessarily want to show of hands, but I'm almost certain that everyone in this room can acknowledge that there is difficult people in your life. And if you can't think of any difficult people in your life, you may be the difficult person in somebody else's life. 2 weeks ago, Eileen preached through the greatest commandment, looking at this passage from Matthew 22, where Jesus is confronted by these lawyer-type people, and he says, okay, you got all these Old Testament Torahs, you got all these scriptures. Jesus, really boil it down. What's the most important thing? And Eileen did a great job unpacking that the most important thing is that we worship God fully. This isn't a compartmentalized worship of God, but it is a full surrender to Him. But the other thing that we see in the Matthew 22 passage is that Jesus says, basically it all dials down to this. Love the Lord your God, and also the second is like this, love your neighbor as yourself. In fact, he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Everything, right? This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. In fact, all of the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. So if you're new to the Bible, if you've never taken any introduction to the Bible stuff, you walked in this morning, sat down, and realized there's this blue book in the seat in front of you or behind you or next to you, like, what is this all about? Jesus says it's about loving God completely and about loving those around you. Everything you have surrendered to the transforming power, authority, and hope of Jesus Christ and allowing Him to live through you. But there was this issue that arose for this lawyer type, this Pharisee that asked this question. Namely, there was a disconnect between what they knew to be true and how they actually lived it out. Like, Jesus doesn't share with him anything new. The lawyer doesn't walk away being like, oh, I never thought of it that way. I never thought love God completely and love your neighbor. No, there was a disconnect between what he knew to be true and how he lived it out at the heart level. And the reality is this can be true of us also, isn't it? We can know this truth. We can know what God's desire is for us. We can know what we've been called to do. But how we live it out is entirely different. Now, it'd be great if everyone was easy to get along with. If you could walk through your list of all your coworkers, of all your family members. You think about Christmas coming up in 5 more months, and, you just start thinking through, like, man, I'm so glad I got to be around everyone. But chances are there are people in your life that you kind of put an asterisk by in that list, right? Like, as long as we don't talk about this subject, or as long as this doesn't happen, as long as nobody brings fruitcake, we'll be okay. As long as, whatever the case may be, there's people in your life that have that difficult tendency when you relate to them. Because this is not going to be a revolutionary thought here this morning, but the reality is that truly loving people is not easy. I disconnected it, Steve. That's what I did. The wire hanging to the side of the computer down there where I put the jump drive, that'll be easier for us. Truly loving people is not easy. It's a construction zone. Truly loving people is not easy. This is not something that we don't know, right? Truly loving ourselves is not easy. Truly loving other people is not easy. Truly loving other people who are very difficult to be around is not easy. So what's partly so incredible is that Jesus tells them to love God, love others. But yet they expected something else. They expected Jesus to say the most important things are love God with everything, love your neighbor as yourself, and hate your enemies. This lawyer, when he asked this, fully expected Jesus to say, love your neighbor as yourself and hate your enemies. Why? Let me demonstrate this for you. Batman and macaroni and cookies and, well, I don't think go either way. Lightning and, right? Okay, why do we know those things? Because it's been ingrained as that those things go together. For this Pharisee, for this lawyer asking this question of Jesus, what's the most important things? He has been ingrained in him that loving your neighbor as yourself and hating your enemies go hand in hand. He expected that when Jesus would say, here's the most important things, that not only would he say, love your neighbor, but he would also then say, hate your enemies. And we look at this and we go, whoa, Jesus, that's so revolutionary. But the truth is, where Jesus is pulling this from is from Leviticus 19, where we'll spend our time together this morning. And where Jesus is talking about truly loving other people is not easy. And this idea of not hating your enemy is not this revolutionary thing that Jesus, but it's been God's design from the beginning. We're going to discover this morning over the next 3 weeks why it's so important to Jesus and what we're called to do about it, how we can begin to step into loving others more truly. So I invite you to grab a Bible with you. If you didn't bring one, there's one in the seat that you're seated behind, in front of, next to. I want to encourage you to open to Leviticus. Leviticus is the third book of the Bible. So if you see Genesis, you'll go Exodus, you'll go Leviticus. Leviticus is not a book of the Bible that we spend a whole lot of time. It's a historical document. It's a rule book of sorts. So a little bit of that documentary logging for us what happened, and also some of the rules. But this morning we're going to be in Leviticus chapter 19. Most people hear that about Leviticus and say, I would rather gouge my eyes out than listen to a sermon from Leviticus. But the truth is, and the beautiful thing that we see here, is that the overarching heart, the overarching and underlying heart, that is God cares so much about the details of our lives, that he's willing that everything in and about us will be transformed for his glory and for the good of those around us. We're going to pick up in 19 verse 1, but so you know where we're coming out of in chapter 18, it's this idea that we have been set apart, that the Israelites that God is speaking to have been set apart. So for us, reading it this morning, we got to read it through a little bit of that context, a little bit of that lens as people who have been set apart. Because if you're here as one this morning who has said yes to following Jesus, you have been set apart in the same way. You have been called to live differently. Let me point how this works out, okay? So if you're in 19, verse 1 and 2, the Lord said to Moses, speak to the entire assembly of Israel and say to them, be holy, because I, the Lord, your God, am holy. Be set apart, be called out, be different, because I am different. Because I'm not your run-of-the-mill average God that's been conjured up in some Middle Eastern place. No, I am different. I am holy. So you, as my chosen people, as people who are following me, be different. A couple things you need to understand about as you read through Leviticus here in 18 and 19 is that Moses, who's writing this down, and he's writing this down as God speaking to him, kind of puts an end to some of these clauses anytime you see, I am the Lord, or I am the Lord your God. So we got this idea coming out of 18 that God has called them out, God has separated them out, God, because he is holy, has called his people to be holy, to be different, to live very different lives. He's writing to a people who have been enslaved, who all of their lives have this one mindset, this Batman and Robin, cookies and cream, lightning and thunder, these things go together mindset. And God's going to say, no, I want you to be different. I'm going to call you out to be different. And here's how this looks, okay? All these clauses as you read through 19, because it's important that we understand where something ends and what God's saying. So he bookends these. He says, each of you must respect your mother and your father and must observe my Sabbaths. I am the Lord, your God. Okay, we got this clause. Thank you. Thank you, God. You kind of packaged this for us. I'll put that box aside. I'm going to open another one. Verse 4, do not turn to idols or make metal gods for yourselves. I am the Lord, your God. The basis for all of these things is because of who he is. Because of who he is, we are called to honor our father and mother and observe the Sabbath that's been given to us. Because of who he is, we do not turn to idols or make metal gods for ourselves. All right, thanks. We kind of got this clause, this bookend. So we're going to keep going here. It begins in 5, this new phrase here. When you sacrifice a fellowship offering to the Lord, sacrifice it in such a way that will be accepted on your behalf. It shall be eaten on the day you sacrifice it or on the next day. Anything left over until the third day must be burned up. If any of it's eaten on the third day, it's impure and will not be accepted. Whoever eats it will be held responsible because they have desecrated what is holy to the Lord. They must be cut off from their people. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap it to the very edges of the field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them to the poor and the foreigner. I am the Lord your God. Not going to spend time there. My point is we got all these groups together. This is a big box. There's a lot that we can unpack in that one, right? He reiterates this. Here's the basis for this. I am the Lord, your God. And the reason I want to say that these are separate boxes is because each of these have to be taken a little bit differently. They have to be taken a little bit differently. This isn't just a cookbook recipe. Begin at step 1, end at step 87, and you got a chocolate cake at the end of the time. Each of these are individually packaged here in Leviticus 19. 11 and 12, do not steal, do not lie, do not deceive one another, do not swear falsely by my name and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Carrying this trend through, carrying this picture through of how this is not okay. This is not okay to continue on in the life that you knew, the rules that you knew. No, instead, you've been called to live differently. You don't have to steal, you don't have to lie, you don't have to deceive one another. Why? Because your assurance, your surety, your foundation is in God. You don't have to make this momentary gain by deceit in order to task this out. Do not swear falsely by my name and so profane the name of the Lord your God. I am the Lord. These things matter because you're called to live differently. We live differently because in our lives we reflect God. We reflect His holiness. We reflect that He is set apart and that we are set apart. We are to live differently because we have been transformed by God Himself. God calls us to reflect His holiness. This is why He was so concerned about this little hodgepodge group of people, this Israelite people that He had called by His name, that He had rescued and redeemed. He says, no, you're going to reflect my holiness. You're going to reflect that I have set you apart. You're going to reflect that I am considerably different, that I'm the one true God. You're going to reflect that. And we sit here as followers of Christ, of people who say, I've surrendered completely. This command and this call to live differently is placed on us because we reflect the holiness of God. So as we talk about what does it mean to love the difficult people in our lives, we have this conversation. We want to dig into this conversation because in the way that we love other people, we reflect the holiness of God. This isn't something we can just be complacent about. This isn't just a, hey, do you like ketchup or mustard on your hot dogs? No, this is something that has foundational difference because the way that we engage with people, the way that we love people, even the difficult people in our lives, reflects the holiness of God. Moses continues writing on what God's speaking. He says, do not defraud or rob your neighbor. Do not hold back the wages of a hired worker overnight. Do not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block in front of the blind, but fear your God. I am the Lord. Why do these things matter? Because you've been called to live differently. Because your momentary gain doesn't equal eternal gain. The stakes are different because I am your God. You are called to live differently. I have claimed you. I have remade you. So we get the idea that these rules are way about something bigger. This isn't just like, oh, I didn't pay my employees on Friday. Oh no. No, this is way bigger than just this rule book. This is where we start to see the heart of who God is. This is why this isn't just a how to have a better marriage or how to get along with difficult people in the next 7 days. It's way beyond how to not get angry in rush hour. This conversation of messy and difficult people takes us to the heart of who God is. So let's dig into this in verse 15. We're going to spend the rest of our time, the next 10 minutes, in verse 15, 16, 17, and 18. These 4 verses that set this picture of what this means to love the difficult people in our lives. 15 says, do not pervert justice. Do not pervert justice. Do not pervert the act of bringing this back into wholeness and rightness. Do not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the great, but judge your neighbor fairly. If we reflect the holiness of God, it's important that the way that we engage with the people around us matches God's fairness and God's justice. That God doesn't say, hey, I'm going to exclude part of this group because I only care about this group. I'm not going to favor this group and exclude this group. God says, no, I'm going to judge you fairly. I'm not going to show partiality. My purpose is for wholeness and I want that to be yours as well. So when we talk about loving the difficult people in our lives, it's so easy to want to spend our time with the non-difficult people, right? Just me? I mean, I love you all, but some of you are more difficult. No, I'm just kidding. In this, we see that love is demonstrated by engaging in the story and the position of others. Love is demonstrated by engaging in both the story, what's happening in their life, and the position, the things that they can't control, and the things that they can. We engage with their story. Why? Same thread through 18 and 19, because that's what God did for us. Romans 5:8 says, God demonstrates his own love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Christ engaged in our story and our position. Not because of something we'd earned, but because it was God's desire for wholeness and justice. Love is not about earned, but about given. It's in the face of this me-first environment that we live. It's a deliberate engagement on both spectrums. It's not about the position that we have or that others have, but we engage with those around us because they are created what? In the image of God. Because they reflect the image of God. Because they reflect who God is already. I don't care if you're the oldest one here or you're only a couple weeks old here, you reflect the image of God. In you is this reflection of who God, your Creator, is. So it's not about position. It's not about, oh, you're so poor, I'm going to care for you. Or, oh, you're so special. You're so elite. Now I'm going to care for you. I'm going to engage in you. I'm going to love you. No. It's because we all reflect the image of God. We engage with those around us because they are created in the image of God. Believe it or not, the difficult person in your workplace, in your family, or that you're married to is worthwhile because they are created in the image of God. They have been given value because they image God. They reflect who God is. So because of the way that God has demonstrated his love for us, we say, all right, I can't do this perfectly, but I hear my commissioning to step into that. Moses continues this in verse 16. He says, do not go about spreading slander among your people. Do not do anything that endangers your neighbor's life. I am the Lord. So we got this group of boxes right here that all pertain one to another. And this one says, do not go about spreading slander among your people. In fact, do not do anything that endangers your neighbor's life. The difficult people in your life have probably been the storyline for a little bit of your venting. Chances are, if you're like most people, the difficult people in your life have taken something to be processed with. And it's very easy for that processing to slip into slander, into gossip, into words that are not very encouraging of that person. We kind of enjoy talking about people behind their back, don't we? We love to gain the advantage by putting other people down, by gossiping about them. That their loss now becomes my gain. I'm going to leverage this. We speak really quickly, really poorly about other people, especially when they're difficult. And I think we see from this that this is kind of a natural thing, a natural tendency. For thousands of years, this has been the thing. Do not go about spreading slander among your people. Do not do anything that endangers your neighbor's life. Because we've just spoken that these are words, we need to recognize that our words are important. Our words can be killer. In fact, verse 17 goes on to say, do not hate a fellow Israelite in your heart, but with your words rebuke your neighbor frankly, so that you will not share in their guilt. Do not hate a fellow Israelite in your heart. Rebuke your neighbor frankly, so that you will not share in their guilt. See, here's what we discovered, that our words can be a vicious weapon, spewing slander, spewing hate, just adding fuel to this fire, or it can be a tool of restoration. Did you notice that in this, God does not say, if people are difficult, just leave them alone. It's all about keeping things kind of calm. That's not at all what is just said here in Leviticus. It is. Do not hate a fellow Israelite in your heart. This isn't even about the words that you're saying, but about your position of your heart and where you're taking people. Rebuke your neighbor frankly, so you will not share in their guilt. As we talk about loving the messy and the difficult people in our lives, it's not even just about our final actions, but it's about what's going on in our heart. And so the call that God places on us in this is to rebuke them. See, the purpose here is not just simply keeping calm waters, but it's actually about restoration. That's why we say our words can be a vicious weapon, or they can actually be a tool of restoration, a tool of seeking this back, this wholeness. Because God is different, we are called to live and to love differently. When we hate somebody, we engage with destruction in our hands. The reason why Jesus doesn't say, hey, actually the second one is love your neighbor as yourself and hate your enemies, is because that whole mindset was, I want to enter into this conversation because I want to destroy you. I want to see your destruction. And God here in Leviticus 19 and reaffirmed by Jesus in Matthew 22 is, no, actually it's about restoration. Can I get a praise the Lord that God was about restoration and not about destruction? Because if it had been about destruction, Jesus, while we were still sinners, would have said, I'm going to the beach. I'll see you all later. But he engaged into our story, and he engaged into our position, and he sought our restoration. So we talk about loving the messy, loving the difficult people in our lives. Here's where we end this morning. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. Why? Because I am the Lord. Because that's what I have done on your behalf. I have not held a grudge. I have not sought revenge against you, even though the list against you is significantly longer than you even know. So because you're called to live differently, because I'm set apart, here's what I want you to do. Don't seek revenge. Don't bear a grudge against anyone. God's command to love demonstrates that this is a choice, not merely a feeling. Love is a feeling. All right, so it's not just a feeling, and that's what Hollywood epitomizes, right? Like, dun, dun, the little string music kicks in, and so we get this idea that love is simply a feeling. You fall in and you fall out of love. But 18 kicks that way out of here by saying, do not seek. Do not seek to revenge or do not bear a grudge against someone, but love your neighbor as yourself. Yeah, sure, there's going to be like feelings that come along with some kinds of love, right? But love is a choice. So we talk about what does it mean to love the difficult people in our lives. That's making the substantial and significant and intentional choice to enter into their story and enter into the position, to care about them, to not hold things against them, to not speak poorly about them, to not seek their destruction, but actually to seek their restoration. So I'm going to hit pause for 10 seconds. And I want you to think of the first difficult person that comes to mind. Don't filter this. Just think of the first difficult person that comes to mind. And if it's anyone besides me, here's what I want you to do. I want you to think of that person. And I want you to sit with that gut for a little bit, because I don't want to quick resolve this and give you like a 3-step plan. I want you to feel in your guts what happens when you think of that person and you think about choosing to love them, choosing to engage with them. Because some of you feel tired already when you think of that. You've only had 10 seconds to think about, man, if I had to make a choice to love them, you're like, oh, the mental strain that goes with that. Where your gut just kind of gets unsettled. Because this is real. Because our list of difficult people that we would rather just kind of like stay at the surface is pretty long. But because of what God has done on our behalf, it transforms everything about us. And we don't get the luxury of just letting that be then. We're called to live differently and to make that choice to love them. to engage in their story, and then over the next 2 weeks, unpacking what that means to love them. Taking that to God and saying, God, would you work in my heart? So that when I think about making the choice to love them, to extending them grace like you've extended me grace, to extending them mercy like you've extended me mercy, to being around, God, would you work in me? Because I can't do this apart from you. Friends, that's 100% of where we're supposed to end up with this. Love is a choice to engage in the story and the position of somebody else because God did that. And we're called to live differently because of what God has done. And it's not meant to be on our own. It's meant to be empowered by God himself. So let me pray for us and we'll close our time together.